The gunshot still echoed through the valley as Emma Patterson buried her husband beneath the old oak tree, her tears falling like rain onto the freshly turned soil of the Colorado plains. She hadn't expected to become a widow at 26, but life on the frontier rarely followed expectations. Emma stood over Thomas's grave, her hand resting on the simple wooden cross. The year was 1878, and Pueblo, Colorado was still a rough place for a woman alone. The ranch that she and Thomas had built from nothing now rested solely on her shoulders, 600 acres of struggling cattle land that had barely survived the harsh winter. "I don't know how I'll do this without you," she whispered, the spring breeze carrying her words across the endless prairie. She brushed a strand of auburn hair from her face and straightened her black mourning dress. "But I promised you I'd keep this place running, and I intend to keep that promise." The walk back to the ranch house felt longer than usual. Emma's boots dragged through the dirt as she passed the broken fence line, the leaking barn roof, and the cattle pens that needed repair before the summer storms. Thomas had been fixing things bit by bit before pneumonia took him, but now every broken board and loose nail seemed to mock her limited skills. Inside the modest two-room ranch house, Emma removed her black bonnet and stared at the stack of papers on the table. Bills, bank notices, and a letter from the Sanderson brothers offering to buy her land at a fair price for a widow woman. She crumpled the letter and tossed it into the stove. The Sandersons had been trying to buy out every small rancher in the valley, and Thomas had refused them repeatedly. "I'll refuse them too," Emma said aloud, her voice stronger than she felt. That night, sleep eluded her. The empty space beside her in the bed felt vast and cold. Through the window, she could hear one of the heifers lowing in distress, probably the one that had been struggling with her first calf. Emma reluctantly pulled herself from bed, lit a lantern, and made her way to the barn in her nightdress and boots. The heifer was indeed in trouble, the calf positioned wrong. Emma rolled up her sleeves and remembered what Thomas had taught her. An hour later, she sat exhausted on a hay bale, watching the newborn calf take its first wobbly steps toward its mother. "One problem solved," she whispered. "About 100 more to go." Morning brought no relief. Emma woke before dawn and dressed quickly in Thomas's old work pants and one of her cotton blouses. Proper morning attire wasn't practical for ranch work, and she had no hands to help her. The last two had left after Thomas died, claiming they didn't work for no woman. She had just finished a meager breakfast when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Grabbing Thomas's shotgun from beside the door, Emma stepped onto the porch, the weapon held firmly in her hands. A tall man on horseback approached slowly, leading a second horse with tools and supplies strapped to its back. He wore a dust-covered range coat and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. "That's far enough," Emma called, raising the shotgun slightly. The stranger stopped his horses and raised his hands slightly. "Don't mean no trouble, madam. What's your business here?" He removed his hat, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind, with kind green eyes that crinkled at the corners. He was younger than she first thought, perhaps 30, with sandy hair and a strong jaw dusted with stubble. "Name's Grant Owens, madam. I was a friend of your husband's." Emma didn't lower the shotgun. "Thomas never mentioned you. We met in Denver last fall. He helped me when my horse came up lame outside the stockyards." Grant shifted in his saddle. "He mentioned his place in Pueblo, said he was planning some improvements. When I was passing through, I thought I'd stop by, see if he needed an extra hand." "Thomas died 3 weeks ago," Emma said, her voice catching. Grant's face fell, genuine surprise and sadness crossing his features. "I'm mighty sorry to hear that, Mrs. Patterson. I didn't know." Emma studied him closely, looking for any sign of deception. Finding none, she lowered the shotgun slightly. "Thank you for your condolences, Mr. Owens. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." Instead of leaving, Grant dismounted and tied his horses to the hitching post. He surveyed the ranch, the broken corral, the sagging barn roof, the unplowed fields. "Your south fence is down," he observed, "and that barn roof won't survive a spring storm." "I'm aware," Emma replied stiffly. Grant reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a hammer, holding it up like an offering. "I've got tools and time, Mrs. Patterson." He gestured to the loaded pack horse. "We'll fix this together." Emma's grip tightened on the shotgun. "I didn't ask for your help, Mr. Owens." "No, you didn't," he agreed. "But your husband once offered his help when I needed it most without me asking. Thought I might return the favor. I can't pay you." "Not asking for pay," Grant said. "Just a meal and maybe a place in the barn to sleep for a few days while I help with the urgent repairs." Emma wanted to refuse. She'd learned the hard way that frontier hospitality often came with hidden costs for a woman alone. But the fence really did need fixing before the remaining cattle wandered off, and the barn roof wouldn't last another week. 3 days, she finally said. "You can stay 3 days. After that, we'll see." Grant nodded, returning his hat to his head. "Fair enough, Mrs. Patterson. I'll start with that south fence." "The tools are in the barn," she said, finally lowering the shotgun completely. "Got my own," Grant replied, patting his pack. "And I believe in starting work before the day gets too hot." Emma watched as he unpacked his horse, laying out tools with practiced efficiency. He moved with purpose, his actions those of a man who knew his way around a ranch. Before long, he had collected the materials he needed and headed toward the broken fence line. She should follow him, supervise his work, but there were a dozen other tasks demanding her attention. The cattle needed checking, the chickens feeding, and she still hadn't figured out how to repair the broken water pump. By midday, Emma had managed to feed the animals and was struggling with the pump when Grant returned for water. "Mind if I take a look at that?" he asked, noticing her frustration. Emma stepped back, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Be my guest." Grant examined the pump, dismantled the handle mechanism, and cleaned out a blockage she hadn't been able to reach. Within minutes, water flowed freely once more. "Thank you," Emma said reluctantly. "South fence is patched," Grant reported. "Not pretty, but it'll hold. I'll reinforce it properly tomorrow. Thought I'd tackle that barn roof this afternoon." Emma nodded, unsure how to respond to his efficiency. "I'll have lunch ready soon if you're hungry." Grant smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his weathered face, making him look younger. "Much obliged, Mrs. Patterson." Lunch was simple cornbread and beans with the last of the preserved venison. They ate in awkward silence at the small table, the absence of conversation highlighting just how long it had been since Emma had shared a meal with anyone. "How long were you married?" Grant finally asked. 7 years, Emma replied. "We came out here from Illinois right after we wed." Thomas had dreams of building a cattle empire. Grant nodded. "Good country for it when the weather cooperates." "When it does," Emma agreed. "Last winter was hard. We lost 20 head to cold and wolves." "That's rough." Grant finished his cornbread. "Your husband struck me as a determined man. Spoke highly of this place and of you." Emma felt a lump form in her throat. "He built everything here with his own hands. He'd be proud to see you fighting to keep it going." Emma swallowed hard and stood, clearing their plates. "The barn roof," she reminded him, not ready to discuss Thomas further with this stranger. Grant took the hint and rose from the table. "I'll get back to it. Thank you for the meal, Mrs. Patterson." As the afternoon progressed, Emma found herself watching Grant work from the corner of her eye while she tended to her own chores. He moved with confidence up the barn ladder, replacing damaged shingles with the spares Thomas had cut the previous autumn. By sunset, the roof was patched, and Grant had even managed to reinforce the corner post of the corral. That evening, Emma prepared a slightly better meal: fried potatoes with salt pork and the last jar of preserved peaches. They ate again, mostly in silence, but the tension had eased somewhat. "I made up a pallet in the barn," Emma said as they finished. "There's clean straw and a blanket." "Appreciate it," Grant said. "If it's all the same to you, I'd like to start on the well house tomorrow. That pump mechanism needs more than a quick fix, and there's rain coming in a few days." Emma tried not to show her surprise. She'd expected him to start angling to leave after completing the most visible repairs. "The well house is fine." Grant shook his head. "Begging your pardon, but it's not. The housing is rotted at the base, and the pump will fail completely when the rains come." Emma bristled at his assessment, then sighed. He was right, of course. "Very well, Mr. Owens. The well house it is." Grant studied her face for a moment. "You know, Mrs. Patterson, it might be easier if you called me Grant." "It might be," Emma agreed, "but I think I'll stick with Mr. Owens for now." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "As you wish. Good night, Mrs. Patterson." After he left for the barn, Emma sat alone at the table, confusion swirling within her. Part of her was grateful for his help, another part suspicious of his motives, and yet another part, one she wasn't ready to acknowledge, was simply aware of him as a man, the first to sit at her table since Thomas fell ill. The next morning, Emma woke to the smell of coffee. She dressed quickly and found Grant had already stoked the stove and put on a pot. "Hope you don't mind," he said. "Thought you might appreciate a hot cup before starting chores." Emma nodded, strangely touched by the simple gesture. "Thank you." They established a pattern over the next few days. Grant tackled the major repairs while Emma handled the daily ranch operations. They worked separately but efficiently, and the ranch slowly began to show signs of recovery. By the third day, Grant had rebuilt the well house, reinforced the south fence properly, patched the barn roof, and fixed the squeaking windmill that had been driving Emma to distraction. She'd expected him to leave as agreed, but at dinner, he broached a new subject. "Your cattle need new grazing," he said. "The south pasture is nearly stripped bare." Emma sighed. "I know. They should be moved to the north range, but I can't manage it alone. I was planning to ask the McDermott boys from the next ranch over, but they're busy with spring planting." Grant set down his coffee cup. "I could help with that before I go. Moving cattle is at least a two-person job." Emma studied him across the table. "Why are you doing all this, Mr. Owens? Really? One meeting with my husband doesn't explain this level of dedication." Grant considered the question, his green eyes serious. "Your husband saved my life, Mrs. Patterson." "What?" Emma's surprise was evident. "That day in Denver, I didn't just have a lame horse. I was running from some men who thought I'd cheated them at cards." "I hadn't, but they weren't interested in explanations." Grant's fingers traced the edge of his coffee cup. "Thomas saw the situation, pulled me into an alley and stood up to them. Said I was his ranch hand, that he'd vouch for me." Emma listened, stunned. Thomas had never mentioned the incident. "Those men could have killed us both, but your husband didn't hesitate," Grant continued. "After they left, he helped me get my horse seen to and gave me enough money for a room until things cooled down. Told me if I ever needed work, his ranch in Pueblo would have a place for me." "That sounds like Thomas," Emma said softly. "He was a good man. I promised I'd repay him." Grant looked around the ranch. "This seems the best way to honor that promise." Emma felt tears threatening and blinked them away. "I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Owens." After a pause, she added, "We'll move the cattle tomorrow." Grant nodded. "We should start at first light. That night, Emma lay awake thinking about Grant's story. Thomas had always helped strangers in need. It was one of the things she'd loved most about him. The fact that Grant had come to repay that kindness gave his presence a different meaning. The cattle drive to the north pasture began at dawn. Though small by the standards of major ranches, moving 30 head of cattle across the property was still a challenging task for just 2 people. Grant showed himself to be skilled with both horse and cattle, anticipating movements and preventing potential stampedes before they began. Emma rode alongside him, handling her side of the herd with practiced ease. Thomas had insisted she learn every aspect of ranching, unlike many husbands who kept their wives ignorant of business matters. "You ride well," Grant observed as they guided the last stragglers through a narrow passage between 2 rocky outcroppings. "My father raised horses in Illinois," Emma replied. "I was riding before I could walk. It shows." By midday, they had successfully moved the herd to fresh grazing land. As they dismounted by a small stream to rest the horses, Emma felt a sense of accomplishment she hadn't experienced since Thomas's death. "We make a good team," Grant said, voicing her thoughts. Emma found herself smiling, the first genuine smile in weeks. "We do." They sat in companionable silence, watching the cattle graze on the fresh spring grass. The day was warm, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers across the prairie. "What will you do after this?" Emma asked, breaking the silence. Grant shrugged. "Move on, I suppose." "I've been drifting since the war ended." "You fought Union cavalry," he said simply. "Came west afterward. Didn't want to go back to Pennsylvania. Too many ghosts." Emma nodded, understanding more than she could express. Everyone on the frontier seemed to be running from something: loss, failure, or memories too painful to face. "What about you?" Grant asked. "Will you stay and run the ranch alone?" The question hung in the air between them. Emma had asked herself the same thing countless times since Thomas's death. "I don't know," she admitted. "Thomas believed in this place, said it would be worth something someday, but it's hard to see that future right now." Grant's eyes scanned the rolling prairie, the mountains in the distance. He wasn't wrong. This is good land. Another few years, with the railroad expanding and more settlers coming in, this ranch could be valuable. "If I can keep it going that long," Emma said. "You can," Grant said with a certainty that surprised her. "You're stronger than you think, Mrs. Patterson." Their eyes met briefly, and Emma felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest. She looked away quickly, uncomfortable with the sensation. "We should head back," she said, rising to her feet. "There's still plenty of daylight left for other chores." The ride back was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the ranch, Emma noticed dark clouds gathering on the horizon. "Storm's coming," Grant observed, following her gaze. "Might be a big one." "The weather changes fast here," Emma agreed. "We should secure everything before it hits." They worked together through the afternoon, bringing in the chickens, securing loose equipment, and double-checking the repairs Grant had made to ensure they would withstand the coming storm. By dusk, the wind had picked up considerably, and lightning flashed in the distance. "That's not just a rainstorm," Grant said as they stood on the porch watching the approaching weather. "Those clouds have the look of a tornado breeder." Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. "The storm cellar is behind the house. We should prepare it just in case." They quickly stocked the small underground shelter with lanterns, blankets, and water. As they worked, the first heavy raindrops began to fall, quickly turning into a downpour. "Get inside," Grant shouted over the wind, helping Emma close the storm cellar doors. They barely made it to the porch when a deafening crack of thunder shook the ground. Emma instinctively reached for Grant's arm, steadying herself. "The horses," she said suddenly. "We need to check the barn." Before Grant could protest, Emma was running through the rain toward the barn. He followed close behind, both of them soaked within seconds. Inside, the horses were nervous, whinnying and stamping as thunder boomed overhead. Emma moved from stall to stall, speaking soothingly to each animal while Grant secured the barn doors against the wind. "We should stay here until the worst passes," Grant said, raising his voice over the storm. "It's too dangerous to make a run back to the house now." As if to punctuate his words, a tremendous gust of wind hit the barn, making the entire structure creak and groan. Emma looked up anxiously, wondering if Grant's repairs to the roof would hold. "Come here," Grant said, guiding her to the back corner where the structure was most sound. "This part of the barn is built against that rise. It's the safest spot." They huddled together in the corner, listening to the fury of the storm. The horses had settled somewhat, taking comfort in their presence. Emma found herself pressed against Grant's side, his arm protectively around her shoulders. Under any other circumstances, she would have maintained her distance. But in the face of the storm's violence, human contact was a comfort she couldn't reject. Grant's body was warm despite his wet clothing, and she could feel the steady beat of his heart. "I've seen storms like this demolish entire homesteads," Grant said quietly, "but this barn is solid. Your husband built it well." "Thomas always said to build things to last," Emma replied, her voice catching slightly. "He meant the ranch to be our legacy." A particularly violent gust rocked the barn, and Emma instinctively pressed closer to Grant. His arm tightened around her, and for a moment, neither of them breathed. "It's holding," he finally said. "We're safe." They remained that way for what seemed like hours as the storm raged around them. Eventually, the thunder grew more distant, and the wind's howl diminished to a moan. "I think the worst has passed," Grant said, but made no move to release her. Emma realized she should pull away, that their proximity was inappropriate, yet she found herself reluctant to move from the safety of his embrace. It had been so long since she'd felt protected rather than being the protector. Finally, she straightened, putting a proper distance between them. "We should check for damage." If Grant was affected by their closeness, he didn't show it. He simply nodded and rose to his feet, offering her his hand. "Let's start with the barn, then work our way out." The storm had indeed caused damage. A section of the corral was down. Branches were scattered everywhere, and one of the chicken coops had overturned, but nothing catastrophic. The house had weathered the storm intact, and Grant's repairs to the barn roof and well house had held firm. "Could have been much worse," Grant observed as they surveyed the property in the gray light of early morning. Emma nodded, exhaustion evident in her face. They had worked through the night, securing animals and assessing damage. "Thank you for your help. I don't think I could have managed alone." "That's what neighbors are for," Grant said simply. Emma gave him a questioning look. "I thought you were just passing through." Grant seemed to hesitate, then shrugged. "Figure of speech, I suppose." They began cleaning up the debris that morning, working side by side in comfortable silence. Emma found herself stealing glances at Grant when he wasn't looking, noticing the careful way he handled broken items and the gentle manner in which he approached the frightened animals. By noon, most of the immediate damage had been addressed. Emma prepared a simple meal and they ate together at the kitchen table, both too tired for conversation. "You should rest," Grant said as he finished his food. "I can handle the rest of the cleanup." Emma shook her head. "I'm fine, Mrs. Patterson," Grant said firmly. "You haven't slept in over 24 hours. Even the strongest person needs rest." Emma wanted to argue but found she couldn't summon the energy. "Perhaps a short nap," she conceded. "I'll wake you if anything needs your attention," Grant promised. Emma reluctantly retired to her bedroom, leaving the door slightly ajar. She could hear Grant moving around the kitchen, washing their dishes before heading outside again. The sound was oddly comforting, reminding her of days when the house hadn't been so empty. Despite her intention to rest only briefly, Emma fell into a deep sleep, exhaustion finally claiming her. When she awoke, the light had changed, and she realized with a start that several hours had passed. She quickly rose and straightened her clothes, embarrassed to have slept so long. She found Grant on the porch, whittling a piece of wood with a small knife. The yard had been cleared of debris, the overturned chicken coop was back in place, and even the broken corral had been temporarily patched. "You should have woken me," Emma said, joining him. Grant looked up, a smile touching his lips. "You needed the rest. Besides, I didn't mind handling things for a while." Emma sat in the chair next to him, surveying his work. "You've been here almost a week now, Mr. Owens, far longer than the 3 days we agreed upon." Grant's hand stilled on the piece of wood. "Are you asking me to leave, Mrs. Patterson?" The question hung between them. Emma knew the proper answer: yes, he should leave. A widow living alone with an unmarried man would certainly raise eyebrows in town. But the thought of returning to solitude, of facing the endless work alone, made her hesitate. "No," she said finally. "I'm not asking you to leave, but I am wondering what your intentions are." Grant set down his whittling and turned to face her fully. "My intention was to repay a debt to your husband, but I find myself—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I find myself concerned about leaving you to manage alone." "I'm not helpless," Emma said, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. "Far from it," Grant agreed quickly. "You're one of the most capable women I've ever met, but this ranch is too much for any one person, man or woman." Emma couldn't argue with that assessment. Thomas had always said they needed hired hands, but their finances had never quite allowed for it. "What are you proposing, Mr. Owens?" Grant seemed to consider his next words carefully. "I could stay on, help you get the ranch back on solid footing. We could split the profits if there are any." "As partners?" Emma asked, surprised by the suggestion. "Of a sort. I have some savings, not much, but enough to buy some additional stock. With more cattle and proper management, this place could turn a profit by next year." Emma studied his face, looking for signs of deception or ulterior motives. She found none, only open honesty in his green eyes. "What about the gossips in town?" she asked. "A widow and an unmarried man living on the same property." Grant nodded, acknowledging the concern. "I'd continue sleeping in the barn, and perhaps we could speak to your pastor, make the arrangement official with some witnesses." Emma rose and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out over the ranch that had been her home for 7 years. "I need time to think about this, Mr. Owens." "Of course," Grant said, returning to his whittling. "Take all the time you need." That night, Emma sat at her small writing desk and made calculations by lamplight. With Grant's proposed investment and labor, the ranch might indeed become profitable again. But entering into a business partnership with a man she barely knew was risky, especially one with no apparent ties to keep him from moving on when it suited him. Yet in the week he'd been there, Grant had proven himself hardworking, honest, and respectful. He'd kept a proper distance and had shown no inclination to take advantage of her situation. Emma closed her ledger and moved to the window, gazing out at the barn where Grant was sleeping. The light of his lantern was visible through the small window, a tiny beacon in the darkness. Morning brought decision. Emma found Grant already at work, repairing the chicken coop more permanently. "I've thought about your proposal," she said without preamble. Grant straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers. "And I'm willing to try it on a trial basis, 3 months. At the end of that time, we'll reassess." Grant nodded slowly. "That seems fair." I have conditions, Emma continued. Everything will be put in writing: the investment, the profit sharing, the duration, and we'll have Reverend Michaels witness it. Agreed, Grant said simply. And one more thing, Emma added. If this is to work, I think we should use first names. Mrs. Patterson and Mr. Owens is rather formal for business partners. A smile spread across Grant's face, brightening his features. I'd like that. Emma. The way he said her name, with a gentle warmth, caused an unexpected flutter in her chest. Good. Then it's settled. Grant. They rode into Pueblo the next day to meet with Reverend Michaels and draw up their agreement. The small town was bustling with spring activity: merchants receiving supplies, farmers selling early produce, and cowboys from larger ranches spending their wages at the saloon. Emma was conscious of the looks they received as they rode side by side down the main street. She held her head high, ignoring the whispers. Grant seemed oblivious, or perhaps simply unconcerned with the attention. Reverend Michaels received them in the small church at the edge of town. He was a kind-faced older man who had presided over Thomas's funeral just weeks earlier. Mrs. Patterson, he greeted her warmly. It's good to see you in town. How are you faring? As well as can be expected, Reverend, Emma replied. May I introduce Mr. Grant Owens? He's been helping with repairs at the ranch. The Reverend shook Grant's hand, studying him with interest. Good to meet you, Mr. Owens. Are you new to our area? Just passing through, Grant said. Or I was, until Mrs. Patterson and I decided to enter into a business arrangement. Emma explained their proposal, and the Reverend listened thoughtfully. When she finished, he nodded slowly. It seems a practical solution, he said. And I'm pleased you've come to me to formalize it. There will be talk. Of course there always is, but having the church's acknowledgement will help quell the worst of it. They drafted a simple contract, with the Reverend and the church secretary as witnesses. When it was signed, Reverend Michaels insisted they stay for tea. Mrs. Patterson, he said as they were preparing to leave, might I have a private word? Emma followed him to a small office adjacent to the church proper. Once inside, the Reverend's expression grew concerned. I hope you don't think me presumptuous, he began, but I feel I must ask. Do you know this man well? Are you certain of his character? Emma appreciated the concern behind the question. I've known him only a short time, she admitted, but he's proven himself honest and hardworking, and he was acquainted with Thomas. The Reverend seemed slightly relieved. That's good to hear. It's just that. Well, a woman in your position is vulnerable, not just physically but financially as well. I understand your concern, Reverend, Emma said, but the agreement protects my ownership of the ranch, and frankly, I cannot manage alone. The Reverend nodded. Very well. But please remember my door is always open should you need counsel or assistance. Emma thanked him and rejoined Grant outside. As they mounted their horses, she noticed Sheriff Blackburn watching them from across the street. The sheriff had been a friend of Thomas's, and his scrutiny made her uncomfortable. We should pay our respects to the sheriff, Emma said to Grant. He and Thomas were friends. Grant followed her gaze and nodded. They crossed to the sheriff's office, where Blackburn met them on the boardwalk. Mrs. Patterson, he said, tipping his hat. Good to see you in town. Who's your companion? After introductions and a brief explanation of their arrangement, the sheriff's demeanor remained cool. I see, he said, his eyes fixed on Grant. Well, Mr. Owens, you should know we look after our own in Pueblo. Mrs. Patterson has many friends here. The warning was clear, and Grant acknowledged it with a respectful nod. As she should, Sheriff. She's a remarkable woman. Something in Grant's tone caused Emma to glance at him sharply. There was a warmth there that went beyond simple respect. The sheriff noticed it too, his eyes narrowing slightly. Yes, she is, Blackburn agreed. Thomas Patterson was one of the finest men I've known. His wife deserves the same consideration. On that, we are in complete agreement, Grant said sincerely. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. Emma wondered if she'd made the right decision. The Reverend's concern and the sheriff's protective stance reminded her that she was taking a risk trusting Grant. Yet as they rode side by side across the prairie, she felt a certainty that had been absent since Thomas's death. For the first time, the future didn't seem quite so daunting. The following weeks fell into a rhythm. They rose before dawn, shared a simple breakfast, and divided the day's tasks. Grant handled the heavy labor repairing fences, breaking new ground for a vegetable garden, and working with the cattle. Emma managed the household, tended the chickens and milk cow, and kept the books. They rarely worked directly together, but occasionally their tasks would intersect. Emma found these moments increasingly pleasant, their conversation flowing more easily as they grew comfortable with one another. One evening, as they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and pink, Grant broke a comfortable silence. "You never mention your family back east," he observed. "Do they know about Thomas?" Emma's hand stilled on the shirt she was mending. "I sent a letter after the funeral. My parents passed years ago, but I have a sister in Chicago. She wrote back offering to help me sell the ranch and return east." "But you didn't want that," Grant guessed. "No," Emma confirmed. "This is my home now, and Thomas is buried here. I couldn't leave him." Grant nodded, understanding in his eyes. "What about your family?" Emma asked. "You mentioned Pennsylvania." A shadow crossed Grant's face. "My parents are gone. Lost my father before the war, mother during. I have a brother somewhere in California, but we haven't spoken in years." "The war changed many families," Emma said softly. "It did," Grant agreed. "But it's the choices we make after that define us." Emma studied his profile in the fading light, wondering what choices had led him to become the man sitting beside her, solid, dependable, yet somehow still carrying a sadness she recognized all too well. As spring gave way to early summer, the ranch began to show signs of recovery. The vegetable garden flourished, providing fresh food for their table. The cattle grew fat on the rich grass, and 5 new calves were born healthy and strong. Grant purchased 10 additional head from a rancher moving further west, expanding their herd modestly but significantly. He also traded labor with neighboring farms, securing help with the larger projects in exchange for his skilled work on their properties. Emma watched these developments with growing optimism. Grant had a natural talent for negotiation, and an easy way with people that opened doors Thomas's more reserved nature had left closed. One afternoon, Emma rode out to the north pasture, bringing lunch to Grant, who was repairing a distant section of fence. She found him shirtless in the summer heat, his tanned skin glistening with sweat as he drove fence posts into the hard ground. Emma reined her horse to a stop, momentarily transfixed. She hadn't truly looked at Grant as a man before. He had been a helper, then a partner, but somehow not fully a person with a physical presence. Now, watching the muscles of his back and arms work as he swung the mallet, she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer sun. Grant turned at the sound of her approach and smiled, reaching for his shirt draped over a nearby bush. "You're a welcome sight," he called. "I was just thinking about heading back for water." Emma dismounted, grateful for the excuse to look away as she untied the bundle of food from her saddle. "I thought you might be hungry," she said, keeping her voice casual. They sat in the shade of a lone cottonwood, sharing bread, cheese, and cold tea. Grant spoke about his progress with the fence and plans for rotating the cattle to fresh grazing. Emma listened, offering suggestions occasionally, but found herself distracted by the new awareness of him that had taken root. "Is everything all right?" Grant asked, noticing her unusual quietness. Emma nodded quickly. "Just thinking about the garden. The tomatoes will be ready soon." Grant accepted the explanation, but his eyes lingered on her face a moment longer than necessary, as if trying to read something there. That night, Emma lay awake, troubled by her reaction to Grant. Thomas had been gone only a few months. It felt disloyal to notice another man. Yet she couldn't deny the flutter in her stomach when Grant had smiled at her, or the way her eyes had traced the contours of his body. "It's natural," she told herself firmly. "He's here every day, we work closely together. It doesn't mean anything." But deep down, Emma knew she was lying to herself. Something was changing between them, something that went beyond their business arrangement, and it frightened her almost as much as it intrigued her. The next morning, Emma was unusually formal, keeping conversation to a minimum as they prepared for the day. If Grant noticed, he gave no indication, respecting her apparent desire for distance. Days passed in this new, slightly strained atmosphere. Emma carefully maintained physical space between them, ensuring their hands never accidentally brushed when passing tools or dishes. Grant seemed to sense her withdrawal and responded by becoming more reserved himself. The change didn't go unnoticed by others. When Reverend Michaels stopped by the ranch to check on them, he commented on the tension. "Is everything progressing well with your arrangement?" he asked Emma as they walked the property. Grant was in the barn, out of earshot. "Yes, very well," Emma replied. "The ranch is improving daily." "And yet you seem troubled," the Reverend observed gently. Emma sighed, unable to deny it. "It's not the arrangement, I find myself. That is." "You're developing feelings for Mr. Owens," Reverend Michaels finished for her. Emma looked at him in surprise, then nodded reluctantly. "It feels wrong. Thomas hasn't been gone long enough." The Reverend considered this, his kind eyes thoughtful. "Grief doesn't follow a timetable, Emma, neither does the heart. Thomas would want you to be happy, to have companionship. But what would people think? It's barely been 6 months." "People will always talk," the Reverend said. "The question is whether you'll let their opinions dictate your happiness." The conversation lingered in Emma's mind long after the Reverend departed. That evening she found herself watching Grant as he read by lamplight, a book of poetry she'd noticed among his few possessions. "What are you reading?" she asked, breaking their usual evening silence. Grant looked up, surprise and pleasure crossing his face at her initiative. "Whitman. Leaves of Grass. You know it." Emma shook her head. Thomas wasn't one for poetry. He preferred practical books, farming manuals, livestock breeding, that sort of thing. "Would you like to hear some?" Grant offered. "Whitman captures something about America, about the land, that speaks to me." Emma nodded, curious. Grant's voice took on a different quality as he read, deeper, more resonant, infused with feeling. The words flowed through the quiet room, painting images of vast landscapes and profound connections. When he finished the passage, Emma found herself moved in an unexpected way. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "I never thought of poetry as something relevant." Grant smiled. "My mother was a schoolteacher. She believed poetry was as essential as bread. She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Grant said, a hint of old grief touching his features. "She taught me to see beauty in everyday things, a sunset, a bird's song, the way light catches on water." Emma realized she was seeing a side of Grant. He rarely revealed the thoughtful, poetic nature beneath the practical rancher. It made him even more compelling, and she felt her resistance weakening. "Would you read more?" she asked. They spent the evening sharing the book, Grant reading passages aloud, Emma listening and occasionally asking questions. The tension that had built between them eased, replaced by a new kind of connection. As the weeks passed, their relationship continued to evolve. They still maintained propriety. Grant still slept in the barn, and they were careful to present themselves appropriately when visitors came, but the artificial distance Emma had tried to impose melted away. They began taking evening walks after dinner, exploring the property and talking about everything and nothing. Grant shared stories of his travels since the war, of the places he'd seen and people he'd met. Emma spoke of her childhood in Illinois, her dreams of adventure that had led her to accept Thomas's proposal and journey west. "Were you happy with him?" Grant asked one evening as they stood by the stream that marked the eastern boundary of the ranch. The question surprised Emma, but she answered honestly. "Yes, Thomas was a good man, kind, hardworking, devoted. He wasn't perfect, he could be stubborn, and sometimes his dreams were bigger than reality, but he loved me, and I loved him." Grant nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I'm glad. Everyone deserves to know that kind of happiness at least once." "Have you," Emma asked, "known that kind of happiness?" Grant was silent for a long moment, watching the water flow over the rocks. "No," he finally said. "I've had moments of joy, certainly, but not the deep contentment you describe." Something in his voice made Emma's heart ache for him. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand, a gesture of comfort that was also something more. Grant looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face, a question in his eyes. Emma didn't pull away. They stood like that, connected and silent as the sun set behind the mountains. That night, as Emma prepared for bed, she found herself thinking of that moment by the stream, of the warmth of Grant's hand in hers and the look in his eyes. She wondered what might have happened if she had stepped closer, if she had allowed herself to follow the pull she felt toward him. "It's too soon," she whispered to herself. But even as she said it, Emma knew her heart wasn't listening to reason. July brought scorching heat and the first hay cutting. Grant worked from dawn until dusk, moving methodically across the fields with a scythe, cutting the tall grass that would feed their livestock through the winter. Emma brought him water throughout the day, watching with admiration as he performed the backbreaking labor without complaint. By evening, his shirt was soaked through with sweat, his face reddened by sun and exertion. "You should rest tomorrow," Emma said as they ate dinner on the porch, hoping to catch an evening breeze. "You've been working too hard." Grant shook his head. "The hay won't cut itself and the weather's perfect. Can't risk rain coming and ruining it." "Then I'll help," Emma decided. "I can use a scythe." Grant looked skeptical. "It's heavy work." "I'm stronger than I look," Emma retorted, a challenge in her voice. Grant's expression softened into a smile. "That you are. All right then, we'll work together, but you'll stop if it becomes too much." The next morning found them in the hay field together, Grant showing Emma the proper technique for swinging the scythe. His hands guided hers on the wooden handle, his body close behind her as he demonstrated the rhythm. "Like this," he said, his breath warm against her ear as they moved together. "Let your body do the work, not just your arms." Emma was acutely aware of his proximity, of the solid strength of him at her back. She focused on the task with determination, trying to ignore the fluttering in her stomach. They worked side by side through the morning, falling into a synchronized rhythm. Despite the heat and exertion, Emma found herself enjoying the shared labor. The sense of accomplishment as the cut hay fell in neat rows behind them. By midday, her muscles were screaming in protest, but she refused to quit. Grant watched her with growing respect as she pushed through fatigue, matching his pace as best she could. When they finally stopped to rest and eat, collapsing in the shade of a wagon, Grant handed her a canteen of water with an appreciative nod. "You're remarkable," he said simply, Emma took a long drink, then passed the canteen back. "I told you I could do it. You did. I shouldn't have doubted you." Their eyes met, and something passed between them: mutual respect, admiration, and something deeper neither was ready to name. That evening, too exhausted for their usual walk, they sat side by side on the porch steps, watching fireflies emerge in the gathering darkness. Emma's muscles ached pleasantly, the satisfying pain of honest work. "Thank you for today," Grant said quietly. Emma glanced at him. "For helping with the hay. For reminding me what it's like to work alongside someone who gives their all. It's been a long time since I've had that." The sincerity in his voice touched Emma deeply. "It felt good," she admitted, "to truly contribute, not just manage from a distance." Grant turned to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. "You contribute every day, Emma. This ranch runs because of you, your determination, your intelligence, your strength. I'm just an extra pair of hands." "You're more than that," Emma said softly, the words escaping before she could consider them. Grant's eyes searched hers, looking for meaning behind the simple statement. Emma didn't look away, letting him see the truth she was only beginning to acknowledge herself. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull back, Grant raised his hand and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek, a touch so light it was barely there. "Emma," he whispered, her name a question and a plea she should move away. It was too soon, improper, potentially scandalous. Instead, Emma found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by a force she couldn't resist. The sound of approaching horses shattered the moment. They pulled apart quickly, standing as Sheriff Blackburn and two deputies rode into the yard. "Evening, Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Owens," the sheriff called, dismounting with a grunt. "Sheriff," Emma replied, hoping her flushed cheeks weren't visible in the twilight. "What brings you out this way, cattle rustlers?" Blackburn said grimly. "Hit the Johnson place last night. Took 20 head and shot their foreman when he tried to stop them." Grant stepped forward, his expression concerned. "How is he?" "Touch and go," the sheriff replied. "Doc's with him now. We're warning all the ranchers in the area to keep watch. These men are dangerous." Emma felt a chill despite the warm evening. "Do you have any idea who they are?" "A gang out of New Mexico, we think, led by a man called Becker. They've been working their way north, hitting isolated ranches." "We'll keep watch," Grant assured him. "Thank you for the warning." After the sheriff and his men departed, the easy intimacy of the earlier moment was gone, replaced by concern for their safety. Grant's expression had hardened, his eyes constantly scanning the darkness beyond the yard. "I'll sleep in the house tonight," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "On the floor by the door." Emma didn't protest. The thought of cattle rustlers, violent men who wouldn't hesitate to kill, made her grateful for Grant's protective presence. That night, as Emma lay in her bed listening to Grant's quiet breathing from the main room, she reflected on how quickly life could change. In just a few months, she had gone from grieving widow struggling alone to a woman with a partner she could rely on, a woman beginning to feel alive again. And now this new threat. Emma's hand strayed to the drawer of her bedside table where she kept Thomas's revolver. She'd never had to use it, but Thomas had insisted she learn how. "I hope I still remember," she whispered into the darkness. The next few days were tense. Grant moved his bedroll permanently into the main room of the house, and they established a rotation for night watches. During the day, they worked with one eye always on the horizon, alert for any sign of strangers. Grant taught Emma how to use the rifle more effectively, setting up targets behind the barn for her to practice. His hands were steady as he showed her how to aim and breathe, his voice calm and encouraging. "You're a natural," he said as she hit the center of a distant target. Just remember, if it ever comes to it, don't hesitate. A moment's doubt could cost your life." Emma nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. "Have you ever had to shoot someone?" Grant's expression grew distant. "In the war, yes. And once after, when a man tried to rob me outside Santa Fe." He looked at her directly. "It's not something I'm proud of, but I won't apologize for surviving." Emma could see the complexity of emotions behind his eyes: regret, resolution, a hint of darkness that spoke of experiences she could barely imagine. It was a side of Grant she hadn't fully considered before, the hardened man who had survived not just the war but years of drifting through the often lawless territories. It didn't diminish her feelings for him; if anything, it deepened them, adding layers to her understanding of who he was. But it also reminded her that there was much about Grant Owens she still didn't know. A week passed without incident, and they began to relax slightly, though they maintained their vigilance. The hay was cut, dried, and stacked in the barn, a satisfying culmination of their shared labor. One evening, as they sat on the porch enjoying the coolness that came with sunset, Grant brought up a subject they had both been avoiding. "Our 3-month trial period is almost up," he said, his eyes on the distant mountains. Emma's heart skipped. She had nearly forgotten their original agreement. "Yes, I suppose it is." "Are you satisfied with the arrangement?" Grant asked, his tone carefully neutral. Emma looked at him, trying to read his expression in the fading light. "The ranch is doing better than I expected." "Your work, your investment, it's made a real difference." Grant nodded but didn't look at her. "So you'd like to continue the partnership?" "Yes," Emma said quietly. "I'd like that very much." Something in her voice made Grant turn to her then, his eyes searching her face. "Just the partnership?" The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Emma took a deep breath, knowing her answer would change everything. "No," she admitted. "Not just the partnership." Grant's expression softened, relief and something warmer lighting his eyes. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "I've been afraid to speak, to presume. It still feels too soon after Thomas." "It does," Emma agreed, not pulling her hand away, "but my feelings don't seem to care about proper timing." Grant's thumb traced small circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. "What are you feeling, Emma?" The directness of the question made her breath catch. "I care for you, more than I should, perhaps, more than I expected to." Grant moved closer, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I've tried to keep my distance, to be respectful of your grief. But Emma, I've been falling in love with you since that first day, watching you stand on this porch with a shotgun, refusing to be intimidated." The confession, so plainly stated, made Emma's heart race. "Grant." "You don't need to say anything," he assured her quickly. "I know it's complicated. I know Thomas still holds a place in your heart, as he should. I'm not asking for promises or declarations. I just needed you to know." Emma leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. When she opened them, she saw vulnerability in Grant's face she'd never witnessed before. "Thomas will always be part of me," she said softly. "He was my first love, the man who brought me west, who built this place with me, but loving him doesn't mean I can't." She hesitated, then finished. "Doesn't mean I can't love again." Grant's breath caught, hope dawning in his eyes. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward. Emma met him halfway, their lips touching in a kiss so gentle it was barely more than a whisper. When they parted, Grant rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "I've wanted to do that for so long," he murmured. Emma smiled, a weight lifting from her heart. "So have I." They stayed on the porch late into the night, talking softly, sharing occasional gentle kisses, and planning for a future neither had expected but both now embraced. The peaceful moment was shattered 3 days later. Emma woke before dawn to the sound of Grant moving quickly through the house, buckling on his gun belt. "What is it?" she asked, pulling on her robe and emerging from the bedroom. "Riders," Grant said tersely. "At least 4, coming fast from the south. Get dressed quickly." Emma didn't waste time asking questions. She hurried back to her room, donning a simple dress and boots before retrieving Thomas's revolver from the drawer. Grant was at the window, rifle in hand, watching the approaching horsemen. "They don't look like ordinary travelers," he said grimly. "Too purposeful, and it's the wrong time of day for honest business." Emma joined him, her heart pounding. In the gray pre-dawn light she could make out 4 riders approaching at a gallop, dust rising behind them. "The rustlers, most likely," Grant agreed. "Go to the back door. If shooting starts, run for the root cellar and bar the door from inside." "I won't leave you to face them alone," Emma protested. Grant turned to her, his expression fierce. "Emma, please. I can't fight them effectively if I'm worried about you." Before she could argue further, the riders thundered into the yard, circling the house once before coming to a halt in front. Their leader, a tall man with a scarred face, called out, "Hello, the house. We're looking for water and supplies. We can pay." Grant and Emma exchanged glances. It was a common enough request in the territories, but the timing and the men's appearance made it suspicious. "Stay here," Grant whispered. "Keep the revolver ready." He moved to the front door, opening it just enough to speak through while keeping his body shielded. "There's a well behind the house," he called. "Help yourselves to water, but we've no supplies to spare." The leader dismounted, his spurs jingling as he approached the porch. "That's not very neighborly," he said, his voice deceptively pleasant. "We've ridden hard and we're mighty hungry. Surely a prosperous place like this can spare some food." "As I said, we've nothing to spare," Grant replied firmly. "Water yourselves and your horses, then move on." The leader stepped onto the porch, and Emma saw Grant's hand tighten on the rifle partially hidden behind the door. "Now see, that's where we have a problem," the man said, "because we're not really asking." In one swift movement he drew his pistol. Grant reacted instantly, shoving the rifle barrel through the gap in the door and firing. The leader staggered backward with a cry of pain, clutching his shoulder. "Emma, run!" Grant shouted, throwing the door open and firing again as the other men scrambled for cover. Emma darted toward the back door, but the sound of breaking glass stopped her. One of the men was climbing through the kitchen window. Without hesitation, she raised Thomas's revolver and fired. The man yelped in pain and fell back. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Grant had taken position behind an overturned table, exchanging shots with 2 of the rustlers who had taken cover behind the water trough. The wounded leader had disappeared from view. "The barn," Grant called to Emma during a lull in the shooting. "If we can get to the horses, we can make a run for town." Emma nodded, calculating the distance to the barn, 30 yards of open ground. "Cover me," she said. "I'll go first, then cover you." Before Grant could protest, Emma darted out the back door, running in a zigzag pattern toward the barn. Shots rang out, dirt kicking up around her feet, but she reached the barn door unharmed and ducked inside. Grabbing a shotgun from the rack on the wall, Emma positioned herself at the small window, providing covering fire as Grant made his dash from the house. A rustler emerged from behind the chicken coop, taking aim at Grant's back. Emma fired without hesitation, and the man fell. Grant burst through the barn door, breathing heavily. "Are you hit?" he demanded, checking her for injuries. "No," Emma assured him. "You grazed my arm, nothing serious." He moved quickly to saddle their horses. "We need to move fast. They'll regroup and try to burn us out." Emma helped with the saddles, her hands steady despite the danger. "Where will we go? Town is 2 hours' ride." "The McDermott place is closer," Grant said. "If we can get past the rustlers and reach the creek bed, we can follow it to their ranch without leaving tracks." They led the horses to the back of the barn where a small door opened onto the pasture. Grant peered out cautiously. "Two men by the house, one down by the chicken coop. I don't see the fourth." "He could be circling around," Emma said worriedly. Grant nodded. "We'll have to risk it." "Ready." Emma gripped her reins tighter and nodded. "Ready." They burst from the barn on horseback, riding hard for the creek a quarter-mile to the east. Shouts and gunfire erupted behind them, but the distance was too great for accurate shooting. They had almost reached the safety of the creek when a rider appeared directly in their path, the fourth rustler. Grant didn't hesitate, raising his rifle one-handed and firing. The man toppled from his horse, and they galloped past. Once in the creek bed, they turned north, the water masking their tracks. They rode hard for almost an hour before Grant finally called a halt, allowing the horses to rest in a small copse of trees. "You think they're following?" Emma asked, scanning the horizon. Grant shook his head. "Not likely. Their leader was wounded, one man is dead, another injured. They'll probably cut their losses and move on to easier targets." Emma nodded, relief washing over her. Now that the immediate danger had passed, reaction set in and she began to tremble. Grant noticed immediately and moved to her side, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You were incredible," he said softly. "Brave and clear-headed." Emma leaned into his strength, grateful for his solid presence. "I've never shot a man before." "You did what you had to do," Grant assured her. "You saved my life." They reached the McDermott ranch by mid-morning. James McDermott, a gruff older man who had been a friend of Thomas's, listened to their story with growing anger. "Becker's gang," he confirmed. "They hit the Wilson place 2 days ago. Sheriffs formed a posse, but they've been one step behind." He insisted they stay for lunch while he sent his sons to alert the sheriff. By afternoon, Sheriff Blackburn and 6 deputies arrived at the McDermott ranch, eager to hear their account. "You're lucky to be alive," the sheriff said when they finished. "Becker's killed a dozen men across 3 territories." "What about our ranch?" Emma asked anxiously. "They could be destroying everything." "My deputies checked on their way here," Blackburn assured her. "The rustlers are gone. They took 2 of your horses but didn't burn anything, probably in too much of a hurry to bother." Relief flooded through Emma. "Thank God. You can't go back alone," the sheriff warned. "Not until we've caught Becker. He's not the type to forget being shot." Grant's arm tightened around Emma's shoulders. "We'll stay in town for a few days." The sheriff nodded approvingly. "Good. My wife will be happy to have Mrs. Patterson as a guest." "That's very kind," Emma began, "but no arguments," Blackburn interrupted. "It's not proper for you two to stay alone at a hotel, given your unconventional arrangement. Sarah will be glad of the company." Emma exchanged glances with Grant, who shrugged slightly. "Thank you, Sheriff," she conceded. "That's very thoughtful." They rode into Pueblo with the sheriff's posse, attracting curious stares from townspeople. News of the gunfight had already reached town, growing more dramatic with each telling. By the time they reached the sheriff's house, Emma had supposedly single-handedly killed 3 rustlers while Grant fought off a dozen more. Sarah Blackburn welcomed Emma warmly, ushering her inside for tea and fresh clothes. Grant was directed to the hotel with assurances that they would all meet for dinner at the town's only restaurant. Alone with Sarah, Emma found herself subjected to gentle but thorough questioning. "John tells me you and Mr. Owens have formed a business partnership," Sarah said, pouring tea. "That must be a comfort, having help with the ranch." "It is," Emma agreed cautiously, sensing the real question behind the statement. Sarah smiled kindly. "Emma, I've known you since you and Thomas first arrived in Pueblo. I consider you a friend." so I hope you'll forgive my directness when I ask. Is there more between you and Mr. Owens than a business arrangement? Emma's cheeks warmed, but she met the older woman's gaze steadily. We care for each other, she admitted. It wasn't planned or expected, but yes, there is more. Sarah nodded, seemingly unsurprised. I thought as much. The way he looks at you, well, it's rather obvious to anyone with eyes. Does that shock you? Emma asked. Thomas has only been gone a few months. Sarah reached across the table and patted Emma's hand. My dear, life on the frontier is too short and too hard to waste time on unnecessary convention. Thomas would want you to be happy, not alone. Tears sprang to Emma's eyes at the simple acceptance. Thank you, she whispered. Not everyone will be so understanding. Let them gossip, Sarah said firmly. They'll find something new to talk about soon enough. Now tell me more about this Grant Owens. Where is he from? What are his intentions? Emma laughed despite herself. You sound like my father. Someone needs to ask these questions, Sarah replied unapologetically. Emma shared what she knew of Grant's background, his Pennsylvania origins, his service in the Union cavalry, his years of drifting after the war. As she spoke, Emma realized how little she actually knew about the man she was falling in love with. He doesn't speak much about his past, she concluded, but he's a good man, Sarah. Honest, hardworking, kind. Sarah seemed satisfied. Well, John is a good judge of character, and he says Mr. Owens handled himself honorably during the confrontation with the rustlers. That speaks well of him. The evening was pleasant despite the circumstances that had brought them to town. Grant arrived at the restaurant freshly bathed and shaved, wearing clean clothes borrowed from one of the deputies who was of similar size. Sheriff Blackburn joined them, along with Reverend Michaels and his wife. The conversation remained light, though Emma noticed Grant answering questions about his background with practiced vagueness. It seemed to satisfy the others, but Emma made a mental note to ask him for more details when they were alone. The opportunity came the next afternoon. The sheriff had arranged for a deputy to escort them back to the ranch to collect more personal items, as it appeared they might need to stay in town for several days until the rustlers were caught. As they rode side by side, their escort tactfully keeping a distance ahead, Emma broached the subject. You never talk much about your life before Colorado, she observed. Last night I realized how little I actually know about your past. Grant was silent for a moment, his eyes on the horizon. Not much to tell that's worth hearing, he finally said. I'd like to know anyway, Emma persisted gently. If we're to have a future together, I should know where you come from, who your people were. Grant sighed, adjusting his hat. My father was a blacksmith in a small town outside Harrisburg. Worked himself to an early grave providing for my mother, my brother, and me. Mother taught school until she fell ill during the war. Typhoid took her while I was fighting at Gettysburg. I'm sorry, Emma said softly. Grant acknowledged her sympathy with a nod. My brother William and I never got along. He resented that I enlisted while he stayed home. After Mother died, he sold the forge and headed west. Last I heard, he was in San Francisco. And after the war, you said you drifted. A shadow crossed Grant's face. I came back changed like most men did. Couldn't settle, couldn't find peace. Worked odd jobs, moved from place to place. Rode with a cattle drive to Kansas, did some scouting for the Army, tried mining for a spell in Nevada. Is that all? Emma asked, sensing there was more he wasn't saying. Grant was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, there was a woman once, in Denver about 3 years ago. Sarah was her name. We were to be married. Emma felt a twist of unexpected jealousy. What happened? She died, Grant said flatly. Cholera. It swept through the city that summer, took hundreds. Oh, Grant, Emma breathed. I'm so sorry. He shrugged, but the casual gesture couldn't hide the pain in his eyes. After that, I had even less reason to stay anywhere, just kept moving until. Grant turned to look at her, his expression softening. Until I met a stubborn widow who stood on her porch with a shotgun and made me want to stop running. Emma's heart swelled at the simple declaration. "I'm glad you stopped," she said quietly. They reached the ranch without incident, collecting clothing and personal items under the watchful eye of their escort. The place seemed eerily quiet after the violence of the previous day. Evidence of the gunfight remained: bullet holes in the porch posts, a broken window, bloodstains on the ground where one of the rustlers had fallen. Emma moved through the house quickly, trying not to dwell on the violation of her home. As she gathered her things, she paused at the small chest at the foot of her bed. Inside was Thomas's Bible, a daguerreotype of their wedding day, and the letters he had written her during their courtship. After a moment's hesitation, she took only the Bible, leaving the other mementos behind. It wasn't that she wanted to forget Thomas, but rather that she understood now these physical reminders didn't define her connection to him. That connection lived in her heart, in her memories, in the ranch they had built together, not in objects she could carry. They stayed in Pueblo for 5 more days while Sheriff Blackburn and his posse tracked the rustlers. News finally came that Becker and his remaining men had been captured trying to cross into New Mexico territory. 2 had been killed in the confrontation, but Becker was taken alive and would stand trial for multiple murders. "It's safe for you to return home," Sheriff Blackburn told them. "Though I'd advise keeping a watchful eye for a while yet. Men like Becker often have friends." They rode back to the ranch on a clear autumn morning, the air crisp with the promise of colder days to come. Emma felt a surge of joy as the familiar buildings came into view, a sense of homecoming that encompassed not just the place, but the man riding beside her. "We have a lot of work to catch up on," Grant observed as they surveyed the ranch. The cattle had scattered in their absence, fences needed checking, and the garden had suffered from neglect. "We'll manage," Emma said confidently. "We always do." That evening, after a day of hard work restoring order to the ranch, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Grant had built a small fire in the yard to ward off the autumn chill, and the crackling flames cast a warm glow over them. "I've been thinking," Grant said after a comfortable silence. "About us, about the future." Emma turned to him, her heart quickening. "What about the future?" Grant took her hand, his expression serious in the firelight. "I love you, Emma. These past months have given me something I never thought I'd find again: a home, a purpose, someone to care for and be cared for by." "I love you too," Emma said softly. "You've brought life back to this ranch and to me." Grant squeezed her hand gently. "I know it's only been 6 months since Thomas died. I know people might talk, but I don't want to pretend anymore that we're just business partners, or that I'm content sleeping in the barn when all I want is to be with you." Emma understood what he was saying, what he was asking. The proper thing would be to wait a full year of mourning, to make their courtship official and public, to have a formal wedding with Reverend Michaels presiding. But they had already faced death together, had already committed their hearts if not their vows. And as Sarah Blackburn had said, life on the frontier was too short and too hard for unnecessary convention. "Ask me properly," Emma said, her eyes shining in the firelight. Grant smiled, understanding her meaning. He slid from the porch step to one knee before her, still holding her hand. "Emma Patterson, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner in all things for as long as we both shall live?" "Yes," Emma said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you, Grant Owens." He drew her to her feet and into his arms, their kiss deeper and more passionate than any they had shared before, a promise of the life they would build together. They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Pueblo. Reverend Michaels had been surprised by their haste, but couldn't deny the obvious love between them. Sarah Blackburn helped Emma make a new dress, not white, out of respect for Thomas, but a soft blue that matched the autumn sky. Sheriff Blackburn stood as witness for Grant, and Sarah for Emma. A few neighbors and townspeople attended, some with disapproving expressions, others with genuine good wishes. Emma found she cared less about their opinions than she had expected. After the ceremony, they declined the offer of a celebration in town, preferring to return to their ranch, their home. The ride back was filled with a quiet joy, a sense of rightness that transcended convention or concern for gossip. That night, as husband and wife, they truly began their life together. Grant carried Emma across the threshold of the ranch house, both of them laughing at the traditional gesture in a place she had lived for years. "Welcome home, Mrs. Owens," he said, setting her gently on her feet. Emma smiled up at him, her heart full. "It's been home for a long time," she said. "But now it feels complete." In the weeks and months that followed, they fell into a new rhythm as a married couple. The ranch thrived under their combined care, the cattle grew fat on the abundant grass, and their reputation for fair dealing spread throughout the county. When spring came again, Emma discovered she was with child. Grant's joy at the news was boundless. He took on more of the physical labor, insisting Emma rest when needed, though she stubbornly continued to manage the household and bookkeeping. "You're as stubborn as the day I met you," Grant said fondly as he watched her balance the ledgers despite her growing belly. "You wouldn't want me any other way," Emma retorted with a smile. "No," Grant agreed, coming to stand behind her chair and resting his hands on her shoulders. "I wouldn't change a single thing about you." Their son was born on a crisp October day, almost exactly a year after their wedding. They named him Thomas Grant Owens, honoring the man who had brought them together in a roundabout way and the father who would raise him with love and devotion. As Emma watched Grant hold their son for the first time, his green eyes filled with wonder and fierce love, she felt a sense of completeness she had never known before. The path that had led her here had been marked by loss and hardship, but also by unexpected joy and second chances. Grant looked up, catching her watching them. "He has your eyes," he said softly. "And your chin," Emma replied with a smile. "Poor child." Grant laughed, the sound filling their bedroom with warmth. "He's perfect," he declared, gently placing the swaddled infant in Emma's arms. "Just like his mother." Emma cradled their son, marveling at his tiny fingers and the soft curve of his cheek. "What do you think Thomas would say if he could see us now?" she asked quietly. Grant considered the question seriously. "I think he'd be glad you're not alone, that the ranch is thriving, that his memory is honored in our son's name." He sat on the edge of the bed beside her. "I think he'd be at peace knowing you're loved." Emma leaned against Grant's shoulder, their son nestled between them. "I believe you're right," she said. "And I believe he somehow led you to our door that day, with your tools and your promise to fix things together." "Then I owe him a debt I can never repay," Grant said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Because he gave me everything I never knew I was looking for." Outside their window, the Colorado prairie stretched vast and beautiful beneath the autumn sky. The ranch that had once seemed on the verge of failing now thriving under their care. And inside, a family that had been born from loss and chance and courage faced the future together, bound by a love that had healed them both. Years later, when people in Pueblo told the story of Emma and Grant Owens, they would speak of how a widow struggling to run her ranch alone had been saved by a drifting cowboy who rode in with tools and a promise. But Emma knew the truth was more complex and more beautiful. They had saved each other, building something stronger together than either could have created alone. And in the end, that was the greatest gift of all.